You know, there's a reason the word no carries so much weight, far more than people often realize. It's not just a word, it's a boundary. It's a signal to the world that you recognize the limits of your tolerance, the perimeter of your soul, and that you are willing to defend it. And here's the brutal truth: toxic people don't respect suggestions, they test boundaries. They seek loopholes. They interpret silence as permission, politeness as weakness, and hesitation as opportunity. So if you want them out of your life, if you want them to stop bothering you, manipulating you, draining you, then you need to do something most people are terrified of. You need to draw a line, and you need to mean it. Now, that sounds simple, doesn't it? Just draw a line, just say no. But we live in a culture that encourages tolerance to the point of self-erasure. We're told that it's noble to always be accommodating, understanding, endlessly patient, and those are admirable traits when used judiciously. But when they become compulsions, they turn into liabilities. You cannot save your soul by sacrificing it. You cannot preserve your integrity by pretending you have none. What's even more insidious is how early in life many of us were trained to suppress our resistance. As children, we were taught that saying no to adults, to teachers, to peers was disobedient, disrespectful, rebellious. We were scolded for having preferences, for asserting our space. And so we learned to endure discomfort in silence. We learned that it was safer to comply than to confront, that appeasing others would win us affection, or, at the very least, keep the peace. But that strategy, effective as it may have been for a frightened child, is disastrous for an adult. Because as you grow older, the stakes get higher. The predators become more sophisticated. They don't come at you with threats. They come with charm, guilt, passive aggression, false vulnerability. And if you don't know how to draw a line, if you don't know how to say no and stand by it, you'll find yourself trapped in patterns that slowly consume you. You'll attract users, manipulators, narcissists, people who see your kindness as a resource to be mined, not as a quality to be respected. And here's the paradox. The moment you start drawing real boundaries, the world will not celebrate you for it. In fact, the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will often be the first to accuse you of being selfish, rude, cold, or uncaring. They'll push back. They'll guilt trip you. They'll say, "You've changed," as if that's a bad thing. And in a way, it is for them, because your transformation threatens their control, but this is the necessary price of becoming a fully formed human being. You cannot build a meaningful life if you are constantly deferring to the whims of others. You cannot maintain your dignity if you're always negotiating your worth. At some point, you have to decide that your peace, your time, your energy, your values, they matter, and you have to be willing to defend them, not with violence, not with anger, but with clarity. That's the key, clarity, not cruelty. When you say no, not with rage, not with passive aggression, but with firm self-respect, you are speaking the language of adulthood. You are stating, "This is where I end and you begin." That distinction is the foundation of all healthy relationships. Without it, there's only enmeshment, exploitation, and emotional chaos. And toxic people, they hate that clarity because it renders their tactics ineffective. They rely on ambiguity, on your guilt, on your indecision, on the idea that you're too nice to push back. So when you draw the line, when you look them in the eye and calmly say, "No, I won't do that," or "That's not acceptable," or simply "I'm done," you remove the tools they use to manipulate. You strip them of their leverage, and you force them to do one of two things: evolve or exit. Either way, you win. Now, some will say, "But what if they react badly? What if they lash out?" And yes, they might, but that's their revelation, not yours. If someone becomes hostile when you assert a basic boundary, you're not dealing with someone who respects you. You're dealing with someone who saw you as a resource, not a person. Let them reveal themselves. Let the mask slip. That moment of discomfort is worth the years of peace it can bring. Understand this deeply. Your boundaries are not walls to keep love out. They are gates that protect what's sacred. You don't have to justify them. You don't need permission to enforce them. You are the steward of your own life, and no one else is qualified to manage that territory but you. So, what does this look like in practice? It looks like not picking up the phone every time someone who drains you decides to call. It looks like walking away from conversations that are emotionally abusive. It looks like saying, I'm not comfortable with this, and letting that be enough. It looks like leaving when staying would mean betraying yourself. It looks like silence in response to manipulation and firmness in response to guilt tripping. It looks like choosing self-respect over social harmony every time. And yes, at first it will feel unnatural. You will feel guilty, afraid, uncertain, but that's because you're stepping into a new identity. One that is no longer available for exploitation, one that no longer mistakes compliance for compassion, one that understands that the highest form of love toward yourself and others is grounded in truth. And the truth is this: if someone cannot respect your no, they do not deserve your yes. Full stop. So when you draw that line, when you speak that sacred no, you're not just protecting yourself from toxic people. You're building the scaffolding for a life governed by integrity rather than fear. You're choosing authenticity over appeasement. You're standing, perhaps for the first time, on solid ground. And once you do that, truly do that, those who would seek to exploit you will find they have nothing to stand on, nothing to grab hold of, nothing to twist, because you've already made the decision. This is who I am, this is what I allow, and this is what I will never tolerate again. And here's the beauty of it. You only have to do it once, really do it with full conviction for everything to change. Because the moment you stand up for yourself is the moment the world begins to take you seriously. And toxic people, they don't argue with clarity, they retreat from it every time. One of the most common traps people fall into, especially those with a high degree of empathy or conscientiousness, is the need to explain themselves, to justify every choice, every decision, every boundary. And while that might seem like a responsible, even noble habit, I would argue that it's often one of the fastest routes to losing your sense of authority in your own life. Because here's the hard truth. The more you explain yourself to someone who is not acting in good faith, the more power you give them to redefine your reality. Now, I want to be precise here. I'm not talking about healthy communication, about expressing yourself honestly in relationships built on trust. That's something entirely different. What I'm addressing is the compulsive need to explain yourself to people who do not deserve an explanation, who will not understand you even if you give them one, and who are often looking not for clarity but for control. See, toxic individuals operate on a psychological principle that most people don't consciously recognize. They know that if they can get you talking, defending, rationalizing, justifying, they can destabilize you. It's a tactic. They want to get you out of your core, away from your conviction, and into the realm of uncertainty. Because once you're there, once you've abandoned your intuitive sense of truth in order to win their approval, you're no longer standing on solid ground. You're standing on their terms, and the moment you're on their terms, you've already lost the frame. You see this play out all the time in dysfunctional relationships. You set a boundary, you say no to something, maybe even calmly, respectfully, and what happens? Suddenly they want to know why, and not out of curiosity, but out of challenge. Why would you do that? Why don't you want to help me? Why can't you just be more flexible? The tone isn't one of inquiry, it's interrogation, and instead of holding your ground, you start to explain, you walk them through your reasoning, you try to show them that you're not being mean or selfish or difficult. You just want to be fair. You just want peace. But you know what they hear? They hear hesitation. They hear you trying to earn the right to say no. And in that moment, they sense an opportunity. They'll press. They'll twist your words. They'll bring up the past. They'll weaponize your own empathy against you, and before you know it, you're doing the very thing you said you wouldn't do. Or worse, you're apologizing for standing up for yourself in the first place. Now, why do we do this? Why do we feel such a compulsive need to explain ourselves to people who aren't listening in the first place? It comes down to a few things. One is fear, the fear of being misunderstood, of being disliked, of being seen as cold or unkind. Another is habit. Many of us were raised in environments where we had to justify everything, where love was conditional and where our autonomy was constantly questioned. So we internalize the idea that our decisions are only valid if they're approved by others, that unless someone agrees with us, we must be wrong. But the most dangerous reason is this. We believe that if we can just explain ourselves well enough, the toxic person will finally understand, that they'll finally stop hurting us, that they'll suddenly become reasonable. But this is pure fantasy. You are trying to use logic in a space where logic is irrelevant. You're appealing to a conscience that's either absent or deeply buried. And every time you do it, you abandon your center. So what's the alternative? Silence sometimes, or simple clarity. You don't owe everyone a dissertation. You don't have to justify your boundaries like you're filing a tax report. A clear, direct statement of your truth is often enough. I'm not comfortable with that. That doesn't work for me. I've decided to go a different way. No apology, no defense, just conviction. And of course, that feels uncomfortable at first, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to being agreeable. But that discomfort is the price of sovereignty. It's the growing pain of stepping into authority over your own life. You'll notice something fascinating when you stop over-explaining. People who genuinely respect you won't demand explanations. They might be curious, they might ask thoughtful questions, but they'll never try to override your autonomy. On the other hand, those who thrived on your self-doubt will become visibly frustrated. They'll accuse you of being evasive, difficult, or cold. That's their projection. It has nothing to do with your moral character and everything to do with their loss of leverage, and you must be ready for that moment, because it's crucial. It's the turning point when someone pushes back, not because they care about the relationship, but because they're losing control. You'll be tempted to soften, to give just a little ground. But that's the test. Hold your line. Let your silence speak. Let your calm refusal echo louder than any explanation could. There's a deep psychological principle at play here. Those who are secure in their own values do not need external validation to stand by them. It's only when we are unsure of ourselves that we seek permission. But if you're waiting for toxic people to validate your choices, you'll be waiting forever. Their approval is a moving target, and they will always shift the goalpost to keep you off balance. The deeper truth is this: explaining yourself to someone who is not interested in understanding you is an act of self-betrayal. You're giving away your authority in exchange for an illusion of harmony. But peace that's bought through self-erasure is not peace. It's quiet suffering. And over time, that internal fracture grows. It breeds resentment, confusion, bitterness. You lose sight of where you end and others begin. So stop trying to convince people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Stop trying to reason with manipulation. Stop offering your energy to those who feed on your confusion. Instead, reclaim the space that's rightfully yours. Speak your truth plainly, and then let it stand without elaboration, without apology, because the moment you stop explaining yourself, you begin to remember who you are. You stop being a character in someone else's script. You start living from your own center. You recover your strength. And once you've tasted that kind of strength, once you've felt what it's like to live without constantly needing approval, you'll never go back. And neither will the toxic people. They'll recognize the shift. They'll sense that their influence is gone, that their tactics no longer work, and more often than not, they'll disappear, because what they were after was never connection, it was control. So let them go. Let your silence be your shield. Let your clarity be your defense. And remember this, the truth doesn't require a speech. It just needs to be lived. You've probably heard the phrase, don't let them get to you. It's well-meaning advice, but when you're dealing with toxic people, it's not just a suggestion, it's a survival strategy. And not in the surface level, roll your eyes and walk away kind of way. I'm talking about something deeper, more disciplined. I'm talking about becoming emotionally unreactive, not numb, not indifferent, but sovereign, grounded, unshakable, because once you reach that point, their power over you, any power they ever had, begins to disintegrate. Now, let's make something clear right away. Toxic individuals feed on emotional energy. That's their fuel. They provoke, prod, instigate, not always overtly. Sometimes it's subtle, passive, even wrapped in concern or flattery. But the goal is the same, get a reaction. Because if they can get a reaction from you, they can control you. Even if it's just a flicker of irritation, a twinge of guilt, a moment of doubt. That's all they need to keep the loop going. The emotional tug of war, where they say something twisted and you respond in outrage or confusion or desperation, trying to explain yourself, defend your value, fix the misunderstanding. But here's the catch. If you don't respond, if you stop giving them your emotional energy, the whole dynamic collapses. It's like cutting the power to a machine. No fuel, no function. Their ability to manipulate dies on the vine, and that's exactly what they fear most, irrelevance. Now, it's easy to misunderstand this. People think becoming emotionally unreactive means becoming cold, distant, robotic, but that's not what we're aiming for. We're not talking about suppressing your feelings. We're talking about mastering them. There's a world of difference. Suppression is weakness masquerading as strength. Mastery, on the other hand, is awareness guided by intention. It's the ability to choose your responses rather than being enslaved by them. And that, psychologically speaking, is a high form of competence. It means you're not handing the reins of your emotional life to someone who doesn't care where they steer you. You have to understand this. Toxic people know exactly which buttons to push, and often they're the ones who installed them. They've studied you. They've observed what triggers you, your fear of being misunderstood, your need to be liked, your guilt, your compassion, and they will use those things against you if you let them. They'll dangle them in front of you like bait, waiting for you to lunge. And when you do, when you react, they tighten the leash. That's the cycle. Provoke, observe, exploit. And it works brilliantly until you stop participating. But that's not easy, is it? Because you've been conditioned to respond from childhood, probably. Conditioned to defend yourself when someone misrepresents you, to rush in and make peace when tension arises, to reassure others even when they're clearly manipulating your goodwill. And so breaking that habit, training yourself not to react, it feels unnatural at first, almost wrong. But that discomfort is a sign you're doing something new, something better. The shift begins when you start noticing in real time how your emotions get hijacked. When you're in a conversation and someone throws out a jab, a subtle insult, a loaded question, a guilt trip, and instead of reacting, you pause. You feel the heat rise in your chest, but you don't speak from it. You don't give them what they want. You don't lash out. You don't scramble to defend yourself. You simply observe. You let the emotion pass like a wave, and you choose your next move from a place of strength, not reactivity. That moment, that pause, is where your freedom lives, because what they want is for you to explode or implode. They want your nervous system activated, your thoughts scrambled, your self-trust dismantled, because in that space, they can plant seeds of doubt, they can shape the narrative, but if you don't give them that reaction, if you remain composed, even curious, you disarm them completely. And let me tell you, there is nothing more infuriating to a manipulator than someone who refuses to be manipulated. They thrive on chaos. And you, calm and clear and unbothered, are their worst nightmare. You're not playing the game anymore. You're not even on the field. Now, I'm not saying this is about winning. This isn't a strategy to beat them at their own game. It's about refusing to play games altogether. It's about stepping out of the dynamic entirely, about reclaiming the emotional bandwidth that has been wasted on people who never had your best interest at heart. Because your emotional life is sacred, your peace of mind is not up for negotiation, and every time you allow someone to hijack that, to pull you into their drama, their projection, their chaos, you lose a piece of your authority, a piece of your center. But when you cultivate emotional sovereignty, when you learn to stay grounded in the face of provocation, you don't just protect yourself, you elevate yourself. You rise above the noise, and something incredible starts to happen. Toxic people begin to vanish. Not always immediately, and not always quietly, but they drift away. Because without your reactions, they lose interest. It's not fun for them anymore. They can't extract anything from you. No drama, no attention, no supply. They either escalate and reveal their toxicity so clearly that the exit becomes obvious, or they fade because you're no longer a suitable target. And meanwhile, you begin to attract a different kind of person, people who respect emotional boundaries, who value clarity over chaos, who don't need to test your limits to feel powerful. That's the beauty of emotional discipline. It doesn't just protect you from what's harmful, it draws you toward what's healthy. But it all begins with that choice, the choice to not react, not out of pride, not out of ego, but out of self-respect, to pause before responding, to breathe when provoked, to sit in the discomfort of silence instead of filling it with explanations, to respond with clarity or not at all. Because sometimes the strongest response is no response. And sometimes the most powerful word you can say is nothing at all. That's not passivity. That's power under control. That's restraint forged in self-awareness. That's emotional maturity. And that's exactly what toxic people cannot handle. So remember this, your reactions are your power. If you give them away freely, manipulators will use them against you. But if you learn to hold that power calmly, consciously, you become untouchable. And in a world full of noise, that kind of inner quiet speaks volumes. Control your reactions, and you control the game. Lose your reactions, and you end it.